Hi, I'm Father Taylor Albright. I'm the priest and pastor here at Trinity Church in Towerville, Connecticut, which is really part of Simsbury. And I'm continuing our discussion that we began with Dan Nicewonger, who's not only a guy who's an interesting guy to talk to, but he's an old friend of mine, going all the way back to 2004. And I would say, I don't know, I think probably both of us had more hair at the
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
I might have actually had more hair, but anyway, so that's a long time ago,
Yeah.
going back. And Dan is a guy who's not only a good guy, but is a very much a Christian guy who has been helpful to me in my life when I was under a lot of pressure, trying to work out issues and planting a church. And he was one of my go-to guys in the Springfield area when I lived up in Western Massachusetts to talk to. And we used to pray together down here in Simsbury at a place called the Center for Renewal, which is a retreat area that's attached to the property of the Presbyterian Church here in town, the Barn. And where we last left off is Dan had served as a pastor. So by 2016, maybe you served as a pastor for how long? So like 16, 20?
Yeah. Well, geez, since 1995. So for a while, been doing it for a while.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah, I think after your first like 8 years, you go, how long have you been a pastor? For a while.
For a while, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for a while.
And so in 2016, with a daughter getting ready to go to the prom and his son off in college and his wife, and as a pastor of a church, Dan discovered that the soreness in his shoulder was related to the fact that he had stage 4 colon cancer. And in our first installment, where we left off was, the shock of it all. That right at the time where you thought, like, man, I'm feeling my best. I feel like I really started to get this pastoring thing down, and this right at there at the kind of like suddenly this like stage 4, cancer. And the last where we left off was basically you were starting to talk about how you saw that like God's grace was somehow in the cancer. Now, one of the responses that I think, most of us, myself would have would be, cancer is not supposed to happen, or if it does, it's an interrupter. And where is God in this? That Jesus is going to come and we'll pray and Jesus will heal me. And so I'm just kind of curious. So when it comes to healing, I mean, I'm certain that people probably all over the place were praying for you. So, did you ever think about, like, in terms of cancer, there's treatment, yes, but how about healing? How did you come to understand God's healing with the cancer that you're dealing with?
Well, that's a good question. So my oncologist was very clear at the very beginning that he was never going to use words like remission. It was never going to use words like healed in relationship to my cancer, the type of cancer that I have. That my life was going to be a time of treatment and then being off of treatment and then going back on treatment. And so really struggled with that word of healing. What's that look like? So I really believe that God could, touch and remove and heal at any moment's time. And at the same time, my oncologist is telling me, yeah, that's not going to be what's going to happen in your life. So I came to understand healing in this way, that healing is not a matter of if in my life, it's a matter of when. And God could, if God desired to touch my body and remove the cancer from my body immediately, God could work through the treatments that the doctors have been putting me through for the last 6 years, and totally cure me of my cancer. Or the ultimate healing is going to come when Christ calls me home, and I stand with Christ, and at that point my body will be healed. And so I've stopped thinking about healing as a matter of if, and I've been thinking about it as a matter of when.
Wow.
And I've been totally blessed.
That's really interesting, because I think a couple of weeks ago you and I were talking about this, because undoubtedly, I mean, and as a pastor and as a Christian, did you pray for people to be healed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I pray for people to be healed. I pray for myself to be healed, and that's, and I pray for people to be healed. I pray for myself to be healed. Um, and, and what form and what shape and how that takes place. Ultimately it's the Spirit that's going to decide that, right? It's not me that decides that. And I know what I want and I know what I desire, but ultimately it's the Spirit that's going to decide that. And I pray for the grace that I would be able to accept and to be at peace with how the Spirit wants to move in my life.
So let me ask you a question about that. So coming to terms with that God, the healing that I want, like on Tuesday at 3:30 in the afternoon after the doctor walks out, that may not be what the way the Spirit chooses to heal you. What have you learned as you have understood, like it's not if, it's when, but what have you learned about living and dealing with it, in the meantime?
So the Jesuits have a way of thinking which has been extremely helpful to me. And they talk about all of life being one of two things. It's gift or grace. And that every single piece and part of our lives is a gift. The good things, like the birth of a baby, we find that very easy to see. It's a gift. The not so great things, you go into work and you get a pink slip you weren't expecting, and then 3 weeks later you get a better job. We can look back on that and say, oh, that was a gift. God worked through that circumstance. And then even the downright ugly things, the things that we really struggle to see as a gift, such as cancer. It's a gift. All of life is gift. Every aspect of life is gift. And God's grace is there in the midst of us, in the midst of it, to walk with us and to help provide strength and to help to provide the eyesight to be able to see the world as a gift. And I see that in some of the conversations I've been able to have, some of the relationships I've been able to have. Taylor, I'm a much nicer person now than I was years ago. Cancer's changed who I am. It's made me a lot more peaceful, a lot more calm. I take more.
Well, let me ask you a question. So let me ask you a question. So how about for your wife? I mean, does your wife be able to see this? Because it could be that you said, well, I came to terms with this. Meanwhile, your wife is like, my husband has cancer. How has that grace been operating in your wife's life?
That's a really good question. And that's, as a caregiver, the caregivers, honestly, I think are the people that struggle a whole lot more than those who actually have the illness, because they're sitting and are standing and walking alongside those whom they love dearly. And I think for my wife, I think she begins to see it, and I think there's moments where she sees it. We talk about it a lot, and we can talk about the gift that God has given us in this time. Look, my wife and I are a whole lot closer now than we ever were before, because I had to slow down. The gift of cancer slowed me down, and instead of moving at 100 miles an hour, throughout life, I might be moving at 20 miles an hour, which means, what? I want to spend more time with her. Cancer, one of the things that cancer did for me, when the doctor tells you you only have 2 years to live, which is what he told me when we first met. He said, look, I'm telling you to go home and get your affairs in order. The most you have is 2 years to live. All of a sudden, I got very clear on what was important to me and what was not important to me. And my wife and my family became way more important to me than a whole lot of other things that up until that point were important. And the gift in that was, we started spending way more time together than we had been up until that point. Not that we had a bad relationship, because we didn't. We had a great relationship, but our relationship grew even more. And that was part of the gift of the cancer.
So I tell you what, yeah, I want to do one more conversation with you, and I want to talk about. So it's one thing to, I think a lot of us say, "Well, I've come to believe in Jesus, and I come to church, as often as I can, and I worship Jesus. And I certainly believe Jesus died on a cross for my sins. I get that. I believe He is risen from the dead, and I believe that because I trust in Him, that at some point when I die, I'll go to heaven. So discipleship is I do some Bible studies, and some of it's informative, perhaps like maybe inspirational a little bit of time. But I don't know that we approach discipleship as how do we learn how to see to get to a place where we can see that even in we could even see cancer as a gift and the presence of God's grace. So I know that just didn't. I don't think that probably came because like one day you woke up and it was like, ah, and people were like angels around you, and you suddenly got this understanding. So I want to talk to you a little bit how you went from like, I think this could be true, to what practices have you done to learn how to be able to appropriate that as a way. So let's get together one more time.
Sounds
And,
good.
and so look forward to that. So again, we'll talk to you guys again. Taylor Albright here at Trinity Church in Towiersville. Just remind you, October 2nd, we are having a service, our worship service, actually both services, but the 9:15 will have more stuff going on, but around what we're talking about here, particularly with prayers of healing for anybody whose life, caregivers who've all been touched, people with cancer, people who have lost people with cancer. We're going to be having a healing service on at 9:15 on October 2nd. So we'll talk to you soon.